The title of my sermon here tonight is The Tragedy of Solomon's Life. The tragedy of Solomon's life. We read in 1 Kings 2 verse 10 that David died. David died. Verse 12, then sat Solomon upon the throne. Chapter 3 verse 3, and Solomon loved the Lord. Solomon loved the Lord. Walking in the statutes of David, his father. Verse 5, and the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream. And God said, Ask what I shall give thee. Ask what I shall give thee. Verse 9, and Solomon said, Give thy servant an understanding heart, that I may discern between good and bad. That is, between good and evil, between right and wrong. Verse 10, and the speech pleased the Lord. That Solomon had asked this. Verse 12, and God said unto him, I have done. I have done. According to thy words, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart. 2 Chronicles 1 verse 1, and the Lord his God was with him. The Lord his God was with him and magnified him. That is, he honored him. He honored him exceedingly. 1 Kings 10 verse 24, and all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. 2 Chronicles 9 verse 23, and all the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom that God had put in his heart. And the Queen of Sheba exclaimed in 2 Chronicles 9 verse 6, the half of the greatness of thy wisdom was not told to me. The half of the greatness of thy wisdom was not told to me. 1 Kings 10 verse 8. Happy are thy men, she said. Happy are thy people. Happy are these thy servants. Verse 9. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighteth in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel. Therefore made he thee king. What an incredible beginning. What an incredible beginning. But Solomon had a tragic ending. Solomon had a tragic ending. Will you? Will you? In 1 Kings 3 verse 14, God had warned him, if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, then, if, and then are two crucial words. If and then are two crucial words strewn throughout the Bible, beloved. And none of us dare overlook that. But Solomon tragically kept not that which the Lord had commanded. 1 Kings 11 verse 1. But did evil in the sight of God. Verse 6, verse 9, and the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart turned from the Lord. Now, that can sadly happen to us also, beloved. That can happen to us also, beloved. The Queen of Sheba had given Solomon this noble tribute. Happy are thy people, with thee as their king. But they soon despaired under his eventual foolish and tyrannical reign. At his death, a weary and disillusioned nation pled with Solomon's heir apparent, Rehoboam, thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore ease thou somewhat the grievous servitude of thy father, and his heavy yoke that he put on us. But Rehoboam proved to be gravely foolish from the start, and consequently faced the rejection of most of his people. David Wilkerson of Times Square Church, New York, said the first thing God removes from a Christian who backslides is discernment. The first thing God removes from a Christian who backslides is discernment. That, I believe, is tragically what happened to Solomon, beloved. But why? Why did such a glorious beginning end in such shame? Why did such a glorious beginning end in such shame? Now the answer to that question, I believe, is given to us. The answer to that question, I believe, is given to us in the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes, which is a staggering sermon delivered to us by Solomon himself before his death. Ecclesiastes, literally translated, the preacher. The preacher, contextually meaning the preacher's sermon. But in essence, it was Solomon's shameful confession, in which he reflects on how he lost the integrity of his initial pursuit of God. Have you? Does that happen to you? In chapter 1, verse 17, he confesses, I gave my heart, I gave myself to know wisdom, and to know madness. And folly. In other words, what was I thinking of? What was I thinking of when I buried integrity and single-mindedness in my pursuit of God? It was madness doing that. For it only brought shame and sorrow and weariness to my life. Now, the first thing he confessed doing, that he now realized was madness, was literal madness. The first thing he confessed doing, that he now realized was literal madness, was when he buried his initial pursuit of God-imparted knowledge in order to live a God-glorifying life. When he buried his initial pursuit of God-imparted knowledge in order to live a God-glorifying life and stooped to embrace a carnal pursuit of prideful knowledge in order to live a self-glorifying life. Chapter 1, verse 13, I gave my heart initially to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things. But then, verse 16, I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I have gotten more wisdom than all that have been before me. Yes, I initially gave my heart to know wisdom, but then stooped to what I now realize was madness and doing and folly. And in chapter 12, verse 12, he sorrowfully cried out in disillusionment of making many books, there's no end. And much study is a weariness of the flesh. Much study that was not sought for edifying, but self-glorifying, swiftly became a weariness of the flesh to him. So the first thing he confesses, having tragically stooped to, that he now looked upon as madness doing, was when he buried his initial transparent and humble and noble pursuit of God-imparted revelation and knowledge in order to live a God-glorifying life, and foolishly embraced a prideful pursuit of knowledge in order to live a self-glorifying life. And in doing that, he lost every intention of implementing or living those God-imparted truths. I want to repeat that. In doing that, he lost every intention of implementing or living those God-imparted truths. And we all must beware here, beloved. We all must beware here. For all integrity is immediately crippled the moment we cease to live only for God's smile. And this was Solomon's first fearful warning to all who would read this, his heart-breaking confessional sermon. All integrity is immediately crippled the moment we cease to live only for God's smile. I have known men in this world who were living encyclopedias of this book. Every doctrine, every theological facet of truth, historical, church history, everything there is about Christianity, you name it, about even today's movements, heretical or good or once good and now lost. He could tell you like a living encyclopedia. When I was near him, I used to say, stop, just wait. And I'd pull out papers and pens and say, now go on. He was a living encyclopedia. Of biblical truths. But he eventually brought great dishonor and shame upon Christendom when it became evident that he didn't live the truths he preached. I have known men again and again who left me in awe at their knowledge, their incredible grasp and understanding, as it were. But they brought great dishonor and shame upon Christendom when it became evident they didn't live the truths they preached. Now, I have no doubt that they had started with genuine humility, transparency, and integrity like Solomon. But like Solomon, they also fell into the trap of seeking self-glory and thereby ceased to seek grace. The grace that God would have given them to live a holy life through the knowledge they had obtained. Beloved, God is a jealous God. Exodus 20 verse 5. And His sensitivity as He sees our motives, in serving Him, is unnerving and fearful. I believe that the great warning to us here is that it is possible to become living encyclopedias on the truths and doctrines of the sacred book, and to tragically experience no genuine desire or intention of living or implementing those truths. I believe that the great warning to us here is that it is possible to become living encyclopedias on the truths and doctrines of the sacred book, and to tragically experience no genuine desire or intention of living or implementing these truths. The tragedy of a sacrificial pursuit after biblical and theological knowledge with no intention or desire to live it. I wonder what percentage of preachers alone in the evangelical pulpits of our world are guilty of this, as I look at them being exposed one by one across the world. In shameful sin. While they were preaching all this knowledge that impressed and left men and women in awe. Now, the second thing. The second thing he sorrowfully confesses to have stooped to, that led him to his making shipwreck of his spiritual life and pursuit of God, was to have become consumed with a passion for wealth and materialism, but once again for self-glorification. In chapter 2, verse 4, he reflected, I made me great works. I builded me houses. Verse 7, I had great possessions. Verse 8, I gathered me silver and gold. Verse 9, so I was great. I was great. Verse 10, and whatsoever my eyes desired, I kept not from them. But then in verse 11, he sadly wrote, I looked on all the works of my hand. I looked on all the works that my hand had wrought, and behold, all was vanity and vexation, weariness of spirit. Verse 17, therefore I hated life. I hated life. Then in chapter 5, verse 10, he warns us, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. For this is vanity. It's worthless, wasted effort that brings nothing but weariness of the flesh. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 5, Paul warned us, be content with such things as ye have. Verse 9, they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves with many sorrows. I met a pastor in my country of one of the largest churches in our nation. Now, what's unique about this man is his church is situated in one of the most affluent, wealthy areas of southern Africa, where there are millionaires upon millionaires upon millionaires and billionaires. Just to drive through there is unnerving. Here his church is situated, 6,000 people. I walked into his building, the auditorium they'd built. Oh, he started with 6 in a little cottage meeting a few years prior. And then he said these words to me that undid me. Brother, the tragedy of this church is that 90% of all members are millionaires. A good amount are billionaires. Most of which attempted suicide. And I, with my pastors, as the church grew, was taken to their hospital bed as they lie, some of them close to death, some of them hardly able to be revived after the horrific way they tried to kill themselves. And I led them to Christ. I pointed them to the one that's satisfied, that fills up the gap that no other thing you pursue or achieve. Oh, there's a man in South Africa that said, when I become a millionaire, that's when I'll rest. You know, he became a millionaire, and the next day, after he was declared a millionaire, he committed suicide. This man said, the most of this congregation came to this church as a result of us leading them to Christ as they lay half dead. Because wealth doesn't satisfy. You think it does. It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. And that's a shocking thing to find. Having achieved great wealth and financial success did not give them what only Christ can: peace and true happiness. Now, a life consumed with the belief that materialistic achievement and wealth is the means to fulfillment and happiness can be expected from the unsaved, beloved. But when a man who knows and follows heart after God, who walks with God, who loves God, who's fulfilled and finds all the peace that God gives a man who's right with Him, when he allows his pursuit of God to be drowned by a carnal desire and passion for wealth and materialism, he will experience grave sorrow and frustration, for he will completely lose the one thing that truly matters in life: peace with God. God is a jealous God, and He wants our hearts. And He warned against laying up for ourselves treasures upon earth. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Matthew 6 verse 19. Oh, set your affection on things above, not on things of the earth. Colossians 3 verse 2. I know a deeply conservative and loved evangelical preacher. I have known more than one, trust me, who landed up in jail for long sentences for the love of money that took away their integrity. You see, the love of money is the root. It's just the beginning of all evil. Once the seed of this sin enters your heart, it can lead you to stoop to grave sin, beloved, and total disregard and insensitivity toward God's will and commandments. The third and final burial of all integrity in his pursuit of God that he confessed was madness. Madness in doing. Was his pursuit of sensual pleasures. In chapter 2, verse 1, he shamefully confesses, I said in my heart, I will enjoy pleasure. Verse 10, so I withheld not my heart from any joy or pleasure. But he that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. Proverbs 21, verse 17 warns. I want to repeat it. Write it on your heart, boy. Girl. He that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. And Paul also warned against serving diverse lusts and pleasures. Titus 3 verse 3. And tragically stooping to become lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That's a serious verse there. You see, it says there was something overtaken, that buried. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. 2 Timothy 3 verse 4. Choosing to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Hebrews 11 verse 25. Thou art given to pleasure. Thou art given to pleasure. Isaiah 47 verse 8. Does God confront you and say that of you also here tonight? Does God confront you and say that of you also here tonight in your heart and conscience? In 1 Kings 11 verse 1, we read that Solomon loved many strange women. What does that mean? Well, ungodly, foreign women. Verse 3, and he took to himself 700 wives, which turned away his heart completely from God. That was the final burial. This word loved is sensual. It's not just you loving one woman, you loving something. There's something tragic about this word. It implies the sensual desires that made you stoop to this. It's fearful. He loved many women. Didn't matter if they were ungodly. Didn't matter if God had warned and given him the light from the old laws and the commandments through Moses, not to embrace them, not to pursue them, because they would turn your heart away from God. He took to himself 700 wives, which turned away his heart. Verse 3. Completely from God. The final burial of anything left happened there. There was nothing left now. I know a man in South Africa and a lady. She's quite a character. He's more of a character. So I get a little bit startled in their company at times, but I've made notes and used it. She said to him, I suppose if I die, you would swiftly marry someone else. Wouldn't take long. You'll get married again, won't you? So he looked up. What? Never. One was enough, thank you. Well, Solomon certainly didn't seem to think so. he had some other sort of agenda. Ah, well, I have known many preachers who tragically at some point gave themselves over to the lusts of the flesh. And like Solomon, ended in disgrace and shame. Became a grief to God and man. Now the downfall of many people and many great preachers that I have known and prayed with and loved. The downfall of so many. One, proudly seeking to glorify themselves and no longer God. Proudly seeking to glorify themselves in religion, in preaching, and no longer God. Secondly, purposefully and sinfully seeking wealth and materialism. Oh, once a man in the pulpit or a Christian starts on that road, it's the end. God he will not stand in the pulpit with God, even if he has a Bible and quotes scriptures about giving money. Ichabod is written across every single church and man on earth. Even if they have thousands, the moment they stoop to that, beloved. And I hope you hear this sermon, sir. Proudly seeking to glorify themselves. The downfall of many preachers. Seeking to glorify themselves and no longer God. Two, purposefully and sinfully seeking wealth and materialism through religion. Three, evilly, passionately seeking sensual pleasures. In my country, there was a man so revered and loved by his conservative values and his uncompromising message. He really was revered. I preached for him in some of his meetings. And then he landed up on the front pages of every newspaper and the television, I believe, the news, the whole nation. Landed up in jail for the love of money. You see, he stooped in his love for money to take monies from the churches, these massive monuments that were being built to accommodate the crowds, to go and gamble. He's found in a gambling den, a casino, because he now is so lost so much, because it wasn't enough. So he wants more, and so he stoops. You see, it's the root of all evil. Prison, his wife died of a... What a lovely soul she was. I have known so many who had such integrity, that I literally went to my knees after a few minutes with them and what God had done in this world through them. And then the shame, the disgrace across the world as their names were written in newspapers, magazines, as they were exposed in sensual pleasures, stooping to the lust of the flesh. And now are the shame and disgrace of the world, let alone the church. Evilly, passionately seeking sensual pleasures in the end while you preach. That can happen to a man. John cried out in 1 John 2 verse 15, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That means love for God is no longer in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. The world, and the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God, Solomon, now while Solomon pursued God in humility and integrity, this book records that he had peace on all sides round about him. 1 Kings 4 verse 24. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely. And he joyfully proclaimed, the Lord my God hath given me rest, that is peace on every side, so that there is neither adversary, enemy, nor evil occurrent, that's misfortunes that come upon us as a nation. 1 Kings 5 verse 1. But God soon withdrew his hand of protection and blessing from him. For the Lord stirred up an adversary, that is an enemy unto Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. 1 Kings 11 verse 14. Chapter 11 verse 23. And God stirred up another adversary, Rezon. Verse 26, and Jeroboam the Ephrathite, even he lifted up his hand against the king. He rebelled against the king. Respect and love for Solomon was gone. All respect and love for Solomon was gone. And his nation's heart steadily turned against him. But Hebrews 12 verse 5 cautions us here, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord. God did this, took away the blessings and brought sorrows and troubles to try and make him seek God again, to try and make him give up these evil pursuits and set his heart to being blessed and honored by God again. The only way that God will, let's get right with God. Despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, Hebrews 12 verse 5. We see this again and again cried out through one passage after the other in its context. And perhaps that's what God is doing to you. If he isn't yet, he's going to. I guarantee you, child, if you're a child of God, your life will crumble pursuing these things. At salvation, enslavement to sin is gloriously cancelled. Whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. Whosoever goes on in sin is enslaved to sin. John 8, verse 34, verse 36. But if the Son shall set you free, shall make you free, you shall be free indeed, gloriously free. Now, subsequent to salvation, I believe a total surrender is essential in every Christian's life. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice. You see, in the Old Testament, the sacrifice had to be a whole animal, dead, but He doesn't want that. He wants the whole of your life, dedicated, laid on the altar, surrendered fully on the altar of God. I beg you, brothers, by the mercies of God, you do that. Present, dedicate yourselves to be a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world. Don't go for the things the world goes for. That will just bring grief. What? Be transformed now by the renewing of your mind. Change your heart, change your minds from anything that would divert you from an integrity in your pursuit with God, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. I believe victory will be obtained at such a dedication beyond all comprehension. And I've yet to meet the man who argued with me and said, that's not true, everything's salvation. I said, I want to ask you a question, and don't you dare answer it with a lie, or God may strike you dead. So be careful. What about your life? You're saved. I have no doubt of that. Don't you desperately need for God to have a total surrender in you, in your life? Desperately. Before you make shipwreck. I've never known a preacher or a man who hasn't turned away and walked away from me, unable to say the true answer. But those who seek such a dedication, the victory that you obtain and experience through this act of total dedication is maintained only through the discipline of meditating God's Word fervently, which results in true prayer, outside of which there is no such a thing as praying in the Spirit, apart from crisis prayers in desperate need. There's no true prayer. You see, we are born with a sinful nature. But salvation cancels out that enslavement to sin. But a total surrender to God and seeking as you realize where your heart can be going. Just surrendering everything. No matter what it costs, no matter what you've got to throw out of your door, your life, or lose. But don't lose the pursuit of God. Man's heart is evil from his youth. Genesis 8, verse 21. Solomon cries out, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while that is before the evil days come not. For the years draw nigh when thou shalt say, like Solomon, I have no pleasure in them. I don't believe, like we preach, that this is speaking to unsaved people to get saved. No! You young people, get so totally right with God. Don't seek other things. Don't bury your pursuit of God. Of course, Solomon got right with God before death. But it was too late to rectify all the damage and shame and sorrow that his life had brought upon this world and on God's name. The fact of this book of Ecclesiastes is proof that this man confessed where he had gone wrong, and longed for us and all who would read this sermon, as heartbreaking as it is, to be protected from where he landed. The whole conclusion, he says in chapter 12, verse 13, is to fear God, keep his commandment. This is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment, with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Whoa, that's what he prayed for, isn't it? But lost. We have to be very careful here tonight concerning this man Solomon's fall. You see, his confession, as tragic as it was courageous, because if any one of us sitting here tonight were to try to do the same, the cost would be so great. An honest confession before everyone right now of just what you are. The cost of such a confession as this man made before death to the whole world through the centuries. The cost of such an honest confession to oneself will cost. Ooh. I implore every one of you whom God has spoken to here tonight to pay that price. Confess it to yourself. That costs. How many of you, how many of us started off like this man with utter integrity, seeking wisdom, knowledge from the pages of this holy book in order to live a God-glorifying life? You also had a wonderful beginning, but will you end in shame and tragedy? We think we choose to come to a convention. Fellowship is sweet. Tell me, do you honestly think God wasn't in it? For this message alone. But what will you do with this message? One step after the sermon, one word after the sermon, God, Satan, and man will know what you've done with this message. One step after this message, God will know, Satan will know.